When you fire up like a strategy game, whether you're playing something classic like StarCraft or looking at a modern large-scale simulation, there's this incredibly comforting illusion that's just kind of woven into the code.
Hmm.
It's the illusion of the god's eye view, like a tiny scout unit spots an enemy base on the far side of a map, and instantly, in that exact microsecond, your entire army, your home base, your production facilities, they all know exactly where that enemy is.
Right. It's the default state of almost all digital design. Developers call it free omniscience.
Free omniscience.
Yeah, the information doesn't have a physical form. It just exists globally the moment any single unit acquires it.
Hmm.
And to do anything else usually requires an astronomical amount of computational overhead.
Right. But the moment you step outside of a digital game and look at the real physical world, that god's eye view just completely shattered.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't matter if you're looking down at a forest floor that's crawling with 1,000,000 ants or, looking up through a telescope at some hypothetical fleet of autonomous mining robots in the asteroid belt. In the physical universe, information is emphatically not free.
Oh, it has mass.
Yeah, it has mass, it has energy, it has to travel. And because it has to travel, it can be intercepted or corrupted or, it can simply die along the way.
Which brings us to the core constraint that really governs both of those environments. It's a concept known as finite information propagation.
Okay, right.
It is the absolute reality that data cannot move faster than its medium, whether that medium is a worker ant carrying a chemical signal or a radio wave bounded by the speed of light. And when you force a complex system to operate under that rule, it completely rewrites how intelligence and coordination actually function.
There is a lot to unpack there. So, okay, let's unpack this by looking at our sources for today's deep dive, because we're tackling one of the most just mind-bending structural symmetries we have ever covered on the show.
It really is.
We are looking at two highly technical, closely related architectural design documents. The first one is called the Colony Engine Design Document Expanded, and this outlines the architecture for a fully deterministic simulation of ant colonies operating in a voxel-based dirt environment.
Right. Think Minecraft,
Yeah.
but running an incredibly rigorous biological model.
Exactly. And the second document is the Belt Engine Companion Proposal. And this one takes the exact same simulation engine, the exact same underlying logic, and scales it out to the entire solar system to model autonomous, nuclear-powered asteroid harvesting fleets.
What's fascinating here is that the through line connecting these two massively different scales is that single, unbreakable constraint, finite information propagation.
Yeah.
The developers are using the same mathematical architecture to explore how distributed systems handle stale information. It genuinely does not matter to the underlying engine if the delay is caused by an ant physically navigating over a twig, or by light waves taking 35 minutes to travel through the vacuum of space from the main asteroid belt to Earth. The mathematics of delay and the structural solutions required to survive that delay, they turn out to be completely identical.
And for the cross-disciplinary specialists listening today, this is where it gets so incredibly rich. We know we have a lot of PhDs tuning in, and you are going to see your respective fields just kind of bleed into each other in ways you might not expect.
Oh, definitely.
For the simulation modelers and game designers, this is going to be a masterclass in deterministic architecture and why you might want to abandon standard physics engines entirely. For the zoologists and the myrmecologists?
The ant specialists. Yeah.
Right. The ant experts, you are going to see biological behaviors like foraging and recruitment treated not just as instinct, but priced out in strict caloric energy economics. And for the astrophysicists, you'll see deep space routing treated fundamentally as a biological, almost ecological problem. Our mission today is to explore how finite information propagation serves as the ultimate bridge between organic life and interplanetary macroengineering.
So to really grasp the macroengineering of space, we have to begin in the micro.
Right, down in the dirt.
Exactly. We have to start in the dirt. The foundational design choice of this colony engine is its total, uncompromising rejection of that free omniscience we were just talking about. In this simulation, information is a physical entity.
Okay.
It must be carried. And because it is carried by a physical agent in a hostile world, the carrier can be killed.
Which fundamentally breaks the standard real-time strategy mold, right? Because if a guard ant on the perimeter of the colony is attacked by a spider, the queen down in the nest doesn't magically know about it.
No, not at all.
The battle happens in total isolation unless a scout actually survives the encounter. physically turns around, runs all the way back through the tunnels, and communicates the threat.
Exactly. And reading through the colony engine document, they divide this physical communication into 3 distinct signaling channels.
Okay.
And each of these has entirely different economic costs and vulnerabilities.
Right, I saw that. So walk us through those 3 channels.
Sure, so the first of those channels is the courier.
Mm.
This maps to an ant physically walking to a specific target to deliver a message. It is highly addressed and targeted.
Like a targeted data packet.
Yes, exactly. You can think of it as a very rich data packet. The courier can transmit exact spatial coordinates, or a specific roster identity, or a nuanced threat assessment. But the vulnerability is immense.
Because the ant can just get squashed.
Right. It is a highly lossy channel because that specific ant can be eaten by a predator or crushed or just get lost.
Yeah.
And economically, it's the most expensive method of communication because it completely occupies that individual ant's labor for the entire duration of the round trip.
They're not doing anything else. They're just carrying data.
Exactly.
Okay, so then you have the second channel, which is pheromones. And this is like the complete opposite of a targeted courier. Right. This is broadcast communication. It's anonymous. An ant just drops chemicals on the ground, and those chemicals persist in the environment. And what's brilliant about pheromones, reading the document, is that they're entirely self-optimizing through reinforcement.
Oh, the underlying math of that reinforcement is just beautiful. So if a path to food is shorter, ants travel it faster.
Right.
Because they travel it faster, they lay down more pheromones per minute than they do on a longer path.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the shorter path becomes chemically louder, which naturally attracts more ants, creating this positive feedback loop.
It's an emergent algorithm.
Yes, the shortest path mathematically emerges without any central planner or God's eye view telling them where to go. But as the document points out, it has a massive drawback.
It's leaky.
Exactly. It is extremely leaky. Because the information is stored in the environment itself, the enemy can read it.
Right.
But-
And before we get into how enemies actually exploit that leakiness, let's look at the third channel they modeled, which is tandem running. This is where a scout finds something, goes back, and physically escorts a group to the site, leading them step by step. And this is highly secure because, unlike pheromones, it leaves no chemical trace in the world for an enemy to intercept. But the document describes it as incredibly brittle.
Highly brittle. Because the navigation and the survival of the entire follower squad are permanently coupled to the survival of that single scout leading them.
Right.
If the scout gets crushed by a falling leaf midway through the journey, the whole squad is lost. They have no idea how to get back or how to proceed.
So all 3 of these channels, couriers, pheromones, and tandem running, they feed into what the simulation's architecture calls the blackboard system.
Right.
And this is where the concept of finite information propagation really alters the behavior of the colony. Because the queen, or, the central intelligence of the nest, does not act on truth. She acts purely on belief.
The memory buffers in the simulation.
Exactly. Her internal database, her guard roster, her map of the territory, her assessment of the food reserves, it could be hours out of date. The engine is designed so that if she dispatches a massive wave of reinforcements to a battle that actually ended an hour ago, that stale, seemingly foolish order is considered correct behavior by the simulation. It's not a bug in the code.
Right. It is the mathematically correct output based on the latency of the information she received.
See, I was looking at that and trying to put my game designer hat on, and my first instinct was, wait, from a game design perspective, aren't we just building a laggy, real-time strategy game?
It does sound like that.
Like, it sounds like playing StarCraft on a 500 ping server. You issue an order, and nothing happens for 3 minutes, and when your Marines finally arrive, the enemy is completely gone. It feels like replacing a modern radio network with a medieval postal service running on foot through an active war zone.
And from a pure user experience perspective, yes, it sounds incredibly frustrating. But we have to look at the strategic depth that this strict constraint creates for the simulation.
Okay, how so?
By making information a physical, interceptable asset, the developers have turned counter-scouting and latency management into core survival doctrines.
Yeah.
If you can intercept and kill the enemy couriers, you don't just win a small skirmish.
Right, you blind them.
You render the entire enemy colony completely blind to that sector of the map.
Wow. So for the game theorists listening, this creates a wild scenario because you could have 2 ant colonies that are perfectly equal in mathematical strength, the exact same number of soldiers, same attack damage, but they can have entirely asymmetric outcomes based purely on their communication topology.
Exactly. A colony operating on a courier-heavy doctrine is going to behave completely differently in a war of attrition than one relying heavily on leaky pheromone trails.
And that leakiness of pheromones introduces the intelligence and counterintelligence layer of the colony engine, which I thought was just fascinating.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Because if information relies on physical chemicals left in the dirt, then information can be hacked.
In the simulation, every colony is assigned a randomized compositional chemical signature. It's a complex blend of hydrocarbons.
Right.
So if an enemy scout stumbles across a pheromone trail, they cannot simply parse it instantly. The engine forces them to deduce the signature.
And the deduction mechanism requires the scout to actually follow the trail for a certain distance, right? Like they use a process of elimination to crack the chemical code.
Yes. But following an enemy trail deep into hostile territory means physical exposure.
Yeah.
There is a tangible, mortal price to that inference.
But the payoff for cracking that code is immense because if a colony successfully deduces an enemy's chemical signature, the engine unlocks the ability for them to forge it.
Yes.
And this is where the simulation just flawlessly mirrors actual biology. The document specifically cites the propaganda pheromones used by real-world slave-making ants, like the genus Polyergus.
Yeah, the Polyergus ants are a perfect biological precedent for this.
I was actually reading up on this after looking at the source document. The forgery mechanic allows an attacking colony to induce something called an army ant circular mill. And for those who don't know, this is a real terrifying biological phenomenon. Ants blindly follow the chemical trail in front of them. If that trail accidentally loops back on itself, they will just walk in a circle, following each other endlessly until they literally die of exhaustion and starve to death.
It's macabre, really.
It is. And in the game engine, an attacker who has cracked the signature can sneak into enemy territory, lay down a closed loop of forged pheromones, and just watch the defenders march themselves into a death spiral. I mean, it's a game-breaking exploit in biological warfare.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of simulation design, this circular mill is a masterful example of a principle called emergence over content.
Emergence over content.
Right, design principle 2.4 in the document. The developers of this engine did not write a script that says, if attacker uses ability X, trigger death loop animation Y.
It's not hard-coded?
No, it's not hard-coded at all. The mill mathematically falls out of the deposit versus decay arithmetic of trail following.
Wow.
If the rate of ants depositing the forged chemical exceeds the evaporation rate of the chemical on that specific grid of voxels, the loop just sustains itself indefinitely.
But if attackers can just trick an entire colony into walking in a circle to their death, that sounds almost too powerful, right? How does a system governed by finite information propagation balance that? Is there a countermeasure the defenders can deploy?
Adhering to the engine's strict rules, every advantage has an energy price, and every attack has a biological counter. The native counter to the circular mill trap is dead reckoning,
Okay.
which biologists call path integration.
Right. The document mentions this is modeled directly on the Cataglyphus desert ants.
Yes.
For the non-zoologists tuning in, how does path integration actually break a chemical loop?
It's a form of internal odometry. An ant capable of path integration doesn't just blindly follow chemicals, it maintains a running mathematical vector pointing back to its nest.
Like it's counting its steps.
Exactly. It tracks its steps and its heading, often using the sun as a compass. In the engine, if an ant is caught in a circular mill, its total path length traveled is rapidly increasing.
Right, because it's walking constantly.
But because it's walking in a circle, its home vector, its net displacement from the nest, is not changing at all.
Ah. So the ant's internal math realizes, wait, I've walked 10 meters, but I'm no further away from home than I was 5 minutes ago.
Precisely. That divergence between distance traveled and net displacement tells the ant the trail is compromised, and it breaks the loop.
That is so smart.
It is. But here is the economic catch. The colony has to actively invest resources in this advanced navigation. Evolving the neural capacity for path integration costs calories. It is not a free biological upgrade.
Which brings us to the ultimate bottleneck of the entire simulation. So what does this all mean for the fundamental food economy? Because reading through the colony engine specs, it feels like the ultimate deciding factor isn't combat stats or armor or speed. It's strict caloric accounting.
That is the defining reality of the model. Every single ant has a private food reserve in its body. A scout that is forging trails deep in enemy territory to set up a circular mill is constantly burning that private reserve.
Right.
Distance has a strict caloric cost. So when we talk about relay latency, the time it takes a courier to run back to the queen, it isn't just a temporal annoyance. It is deeply tied to the resource economics of the swarm.
Oh.
If a message takes too long to deliver, the messenger starves to death in transit, and the information dies with them.
Okay, so we have this incredibly intricate, deterministic simulation. It models ants operating under strict physical constraints, managing calories, hacking chemicals, and dealing with massive communication lag in the dirt.
Hmm.
But then the architects do something breathtaking. We transition to the belt engine companion proposal.
Yes.
And I want to ask, what happens when the artificial design constraints of a biological ant simulation become the unbreakable physical laws of the solar system?
The transition is seamless because the constraints are mathematically isomorphic.
Meaning they have the same shape.
Exactly, they have the exact same shape. The belt engine simulates autonomous asteroid harvesting fleets. We are talking about self-repairing legged robots, island hopping between water-bearing C-type bodies to mine fuel, and using bimodal nuclear thermal rockets for propulsion.
Right.
But the governing law of their existence is late time.
Because it's not a rule in a game anymore. It's literally the speed of light. Earth to the main asteroid belt takes anywhere from 10 to 35 minutes one way. Earth to Saturn is 70 to 90 minutes. You
Yeah.
literally cannot have instantaneous telemetry. You can't just remote control a drone with a joystick.
You can't. And this is where the computer science specialists listening will really recognize the architecture. The biological courier ant of the colony engine maps perfectly onto deep space network engineering.
Okay.
Specifically, it mirrors delay-tolerant networking, or DTN, and the Interplanetary Internet's bundle protocol.
So can you explain bundle protocol for the zoologists and game designers? How is it different from how we use the internet on Earth?
Sure. On Earth, we mostly use TCP/IP. When your computer wants a website, it sends a quick handshake to the server acknowledges it, and they establish a continuous chatty connection.
Right, back and forth.
It expects split-second responses. If the network drops a packet, it immediately asks for it again. But in space, that handshake takes 2 hours. TCP/IP completely collapses under that latency.
Oh, I see.
So bundle protocol doesn't assume a continuous connection. It uses a store and forward mechanism. A node receives a massive bundle of data, stores it locally on a hard drive, waits hours or days until the next satellite is in range, and then forwards the whole bundle.
That completely blew my mind when I read the proposal. Because the ants rule in the voxel dirt, the rule that a message only commits upon carrier arrival, is literally the exact same mechanism as custody transfer in interplanetary networking.
It's identical.
When a deep space relay receives a bundle, it takes custody of it. And only when it confirms custody does the transmitting node millions of miles away delete it from its own buffer.
It is the exact same logic, and it extends to how they route that data too.
Yeah.
A space fleet cannot use standard internet routing. They use contact graph routing, or CGR.
Contact graph routing.
Right. Because planets and asteroids are constantly moving in their orbits, and the sun routinely blocks signals during solar conjunctions, you aren't routing data over currently available links. You are routing over a mathematical graph of scheduled future contacts.
Wow.
You have to plan your data routes through time as well as space.
To handle this massive jump in scale, the simulation utilizes a two-tier world model.
Yes.
It runs a continuous analytic orbital tier for the Keplerian mechanics, so tracking the orbits of the asteroids and the light time delays. But when a robot actually lands on a rubble pile asteroid to mine it, the engine switches to a voxel body local tier. It is literally running the exact same colony engine, totally unmodified, just treating the asteroid as a microgravity dirt pile.
That's the beauty of it.
But I have to push back here, because this is where my simulation modeler brain got stuck. Here's where it gets really interesting. In the belt engine, they completely remove the adversary. There is no rival ant colony fighting for resources. There are no space pirates.
No enemies.
If there is no enemy to fight, where is the conflict? Doesn't the simulation just become a dry, predictable spreadsheet of orbital mechanics?
It's a very fair critique of the game design, but the adversary isn't removed. It's replaced.
Replaced by what?
The adversary becomes environmental uncertainty and the absolute irreversibility of orbital physics.
Ah.
A space fleet that cannot see far ahead, cannot call Earth for rapid reinforcement, and cannot retry a missed orbital burn is inherently in a life-or-death struggle against its environment.
So the fog of war just shifts.
Exactly. The biological fog of war from the ant colony becomes the uncertainty of water content on an unsurveyed asteroid. If a mining tug commits its last reserves of delta V to intercept an asteroid, and it turns out that asteroid is dry, it dies.
Wow.
There are no second chances.
Okay, so the environment is the enemy. Physics is the enemy. And when you mix the physical mechanics of mining an asteroid with deep space communication latency, you start getting what the proposal calls emergent couplings.
Yes.
And these are wild. I want to spend some time on the D-spin coupling. Walk us through how mining physically alters the network.
This is perhaps the most perfect example of why you need this dual-tier simulation. To mine an asteroid in microgravity, a legged robot can't just stand on the surface and drill.
Right, it would just push itself off into space.
Exactly, Newton's third law. It has to anchor to the rock to manufacture artificial weight. Once anchored, if the asteroid is skinning rapidly, the robot has to despin it. It essentially uses its thrusters to cancel the asteroid's rotation so it can safely redirect the rock or harvest it. But there is a hard physical limit to this, bounded by the R to the fourth power wall.
Okay, wait, clarify the R to the fourth power wall for me.
Sure. It means the energy required to stop a spinning body scales with the radius to the fourth power. So stopping a rock that is just slightly larger takes exponentially more fuel and time.
Got it.
But here's a crazy emergent part that the simulation discovered. A robot's communication window back to Earth, or to its local fleet relay, depends entirely on the asteroid's rotation.
Because of line of sight.
Right. If the robot is anchored on the far side of the rock, the signal is occulted. It's blocked by the mass of the asteroid. Ergo, by physically mining the asteroid and firing thrusters to despin it, the robot is progressively altering its own communication schedule.
That is insane.
The physics of the voxel environment dictates the topology of the orbital network.
You're literally slowing down a mountain in space, and in doing so, accidentally changing the exact time your radio connects to Earth. No designer would write that as a scripted event. It's too complex.
It is purely emergent, and it directly impacts the fleet's fault recovery architecture, which brings us to the tension of the Beowulf Light Time Horizon.
The Beowulf Light Time Horizon.
Yes. The foundational robotics white paper that this engine relies on assumes that if a robot breaks a leg, the healthy robots in the swarm can form a Beowulf cluster.
And for the biologists, a Beowulf cluster is basically networking a bunch of standard computers together to form a supercomputer, right?
Exactly. The healthy robots pool their onboard compute power to run a distributed search algorithm, specifically using NEAT.
And NEAT stands for Neuroevolution of Augmenting Topologies. It's a way of using neural networks to evolve new behaviors. So in this case, they're evolving a compensatory gait-like, figuring out how the injured robot can limp effectively without falling over in microgravity.
That's right. And to run that distributed neuroevolution search in real time, the cluster needs microsecond ping times between the robots.
They need fast Wi-Fi.
They need incredibly fast local networking. But the belt engine simulation reveals a massive conflict here. The physics of fuel acquisition actively fights the physics of swarm fault recovery.
Okay, Fab.
Well, the fleet must disperse widely across different C-type bodies to find enough water to refuel. But spreading out means you introduce massive light time latency between the robots.
Oh, wow. You completely destroy the microsecond response time needed to run that shared Beowulf cluster. The moment you disperse to survive and find water, you lose the ability to heal each other.
This raises an important question. How does a multi-billion-dollar asset handle severe damage when it is physically cut off from the swarm's collective brain power?
Right.
And the simulation's answer leads to the concept of triage inversion. In the biological ant colony, if a worker gets injured, it is easily replaced. It's cheap.
Yeah, ants are expendable.
Very. The colony will just leave it behind or even recycle it through necrophagy.
Corpse economics, they just eat the dead ant to get the calories back. Brutal, but efficient.
But in the belt engine, replacing a nuclear-powered mining robot takes years of manufacturing lead time on Earth and immense delta V to launch it into the belt.
You can't just spawn a new one.
No. Therefore, the triage logic inverts entirely compared to biology. Space fleets will invest massive, disproportionate amounts of onboard compute and time to salvage a severely degraded unit, because replacing it is functionally impossible in the near term.
So they don't just throw it away. If a robot is crippled, they push it down what the proposal calls a role degradation ladder.
Right.
And I absolutely love this concept. Let's walk through the steps because it's so evocative. So a failing space robot degrades from being a highly active, high-thrust tug, right?
Yes. The tug is the apex role. It moves asteroids. But if its main thrusters fail, it drops down a rung. It becomes a surveyor, just using its remaining sensors to map rocks.
Okay. And if it loses mobility completely?
Then it parks on an asteroid and becomes a communications relay for the rest of the fleet.
It just acts as a router.
Exactly. And if its antenna steering breaks, so it can't aim its dish anymore. It becomes a static beacon.
Wow.
And finally, if it loses all internal power, its physical geometry acts as a passive reflector for radar.
The profound theoretical takeaway here is how this alters our understanding of deep space operations over time. Because the terminal state of the deep space mining fleet is not a junkyard.
Yeah.
It doesn't just leave a trail of dead debris. Built entirely out of attrition and strict energy economics, the terminal state of the fleet naturally evolves into a deep space communications infrastructure.
It's beautiful. It really is a macroscopic ecosystem built out of failing parts. But to capture all these incredible emergent properties, the D-spin coupling, the roll degradation ladder, the circular mill, and the ants, the simulation cannot rely on the standard physics engines we use in video games today.
Because they cheat, right?
Exactly. Which brings us to the actual software architecture at the engine's core. The Oracle. Yeah. Standard game engines are built for visual approximations. They cheat physics to make things look good and run fast on a graphics card. They use Euler integration, which accumulates floating point rounding errors over time.
Right.
But both the Colony engine and the Belt engine use a headless, standalone deterministic kernel with an input event log.
And headless simply means it runs without any graphics or rendering overhead, right? It is purely math.
Pure math.
Yeah.
And the core simulation must be able to run at full fidelity, meaning every single entity, every single ant, every single asteroid, ticking every single frame to serve as the oracle.
And the reason you need an oracle is for validation. Because if you want to run a simulation of 1 million robots across the solar system, eventually your CPU will melt.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to optimize it. You have to use statistical stand-ins or virtualized levels of detail for the robots that are really far away. But how do you know your statistical abstraction is accurate?
You test it against the oracle.
Right. If you run the exact same random seed, the optimized virtual run has to match the heavy oracle run perfectly down to the exact mathematical outcome. If it doesn't, you know your abstraction is drifting from reality.
And this strict, unyielding determinism is vital for testing the robotics white paper's absolute hardest problem, which is outlined as the Section 7.1 discriminator test.
What exactly is that test trying to solve?
The robot's autonomous brain has to distinguish between an internal fault, like a physical gear breaking in its leg, and an environmental disturbance, like its anchor slipping in soft regolith.
Okay.
If you are familiar with Minecraft, it's the difference between having a broken controller versus walking on soul sand or ice.
Right. One is you, one is the world.
Yes. An internal fault travels with the body across all maneuvers. But an environmental disturbance correlates only with external signals, like a sudden drop in anchor tension readings. By running a perfectly deterministic simulation, developers can inject the exact same environmental disturbance, the exact same patch of soul sand across 1,000 different AI control policies and observe the fault recovery logic without the noise of a variable physics engine muddying the data.
Because standard physics engines calculate movement step by step. But over millions of frames, tiny rounding errors compound, right? A robot that should be stable slowly drifts into a wall. So they deliberately avoid putting this in a standard server environment because that non-deterministic integration error would compound and completely ruin the scientific validity of the Beowulf compute experiments.
Exactly. And when scaling up to the Belt engine, they use Keplerian propagation for the orbital mechanics, which is vastly superior for determinism than voxel fixed time steps.
Wait, explain Keplerian propagation for the non-astrophysicists. Why is it better than calculating step by step?
Because orbital mechanics is a closed-form function of time. You aren't calculating step 1, then step 2, then step 3, and accumulating tiny errors at each step. You are simply taking an absolute formula and plugging in time equals x.
Oh, wow.
It evaluates exactly at any given epoch, whether that is tomorrow or 1,000 years in the future, without accumulating Euler or Runge-Kutta integration errors. It allows for absolute zero-cost rewinds in the simulation.
So for the simulation modelers listening, this architecture turns emergent bugs into reproducible artifacts. If an asteroid tug suddenly decides to crash itself into Saturn, you don't just throw up your hands and say, well, glitch.
No, not at all.
You can change a single node in its AI behavior tree, rewind to the exact same seed from the event log, and diff the outcome with mathematical certainty. It completely stops being a game and becomes a high-level scientific instrument.
It is built specifically to generate repeatable Monte Carlo ensembles, running thousands of variations to build probabilistic models for mission assurance. They are using this deterministic engine to answer incredibly complex logistical questions that we will face in the next century. For example, optimizing fleet routing or calculating refinery queuing bottlenecks constrained by the Mond-Carbonyl refining process.
Just to clarify, the Mond process is where they use carbon monoxide to extract highly pure metals like nickel from the raw asteroid rock, right?
Yes, it is a highly efficient but tightly constrained queuing problem in microgravity. The simulation can price out the energy economics of that specific refining process against, say, the transport economics of harvesting resources from gas giant rings versus near-Earth objects.
Wow.
The engine handles all of it because the underlying law of delay applies to all of it equally.
This has been an incredible journey today. We started down in the dirt, looking at the pheromones of the forest floor, watching ants hack chemical signatures and navigate caloric burn rates. And we scaled that exact same logic all the way up to the telemetry of the outer solar system, looking at delay-tolerant networking and nuclear-powered fleets. We explored how the physical constraints of finite information propagation unequivocally dictate both the biology of swarm intelligence and the mechanics of a deep space network.
We saw how absolute constraint breeds emergent creativity. Whether it's attacking ants, forging chemicals to trigger circular mills, or dying space robots gracefully degrading into deep space relays because the triage logic demands it. The use of deterministic voxel and orbital simulations here proves their worth not as mere entertainment, but as vital instruments to price out the true energy economics of fault recovery and swarm coordination.
And it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought. If millions of years of biological evolution in ants and our absolute best interplanetary network engineering in BTN and bundle protocols both converge on the exact same structural solutions for routing information under extreme delay, lossy couriers, custody transfer, decentralized degradation, could finite information propagation be more than just a physical constraint?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it implies these aren't just clever engineering tricks or biological quirks. It suggests that finite information propagation might be a universal law of distributed intelligence.
So, for the astrophysicists and game theorists listening, consider this. Could we use deterministic simulations exactly like the Belt Engine to predict the communication protocols and infrastructure of hypothetical alien macroengineering projects?
Oh, absolutely.
Like if we were looking up at the sky, hunting for a Dyson swarm, could we predict its exact network topology simply by plugging in the physical light-time constraints of its host star system?
That is the ultimate implication of these documents. The physics of the environment dictates the architecture of the mind, no matter the species.
The God's eye view is an illusion. Out there in the dark, just like down in the dirt, information has to survive the journey. Thanks for diving deep with us.